Welcome to Doc Discussions with Dr. Jason Edwards, brought to you by St. Luke's, St. Louis. Okay, and so back to the topic at hand. Some people are worried about specific agents within the vaccines, like thimerosal and aluminum. Other ingredients in with the vaccine. What's the story with that?
So the thimerosal is a preservative, and we would see it in multi-vials. So vaccines that you basically, it's like a 50 vial or a 50 dose vial.
Gotcha.
It probably maybe like 10. I don't think we would do 50, but there would be a thin layer of thimerosal on the stopper so that when you were putting the needle in and pulling it out, you weren't introducing infection.
Gotcha.
And honestly, we just don't have those anymore. Pretty much everything, I think, is single dose now. So it comes with its own vial. We put a needle on the end and we use it right away. So thimerosal really is not an issue. And even for a while, they would have ones that were, specifically labeled thimerosal free.
And what did the thimerosal do? Do you remember?
Well, it was just that preservative to keep
why was it bad? I mean, why was it bad?
Oh, well, it wasn't.
Okay.
It was just, this was then another, people would say, hey, this is clearly because of thimerosal that we're having,
Gotcha.
They were basically blaming the thimerosal.
Okay, so you'd say, well, this is it's a more pure product.
Right. So because of those complaints, because of those concerns is why they then came out with the single vials. And I'm sure I don't know exactly. That might even just have been within the last 10-ish years, trying to think. And then the aluminum is what's called an adjuvant. It's something that it goes in with the vaccine to kind of help boost the vaccine's effects, kind of helps the immune system do what it's supposed to do. And so people were concerned about that too, because I mean, it sounds concerning. We're putting aluminum in your baby, but it was very, very minimal amounts. And, the argument would be as you walk down the street, you're being exposed to more aluminum in the environment than you're being exposed to in this vaccine.
For sure. You got, I'm sure growing up in Southwest Missouri, I drank plenty of aluminum and, probably a little lead here and there. And so, I mean, you don't want to introduce a lot of heavy metals into the body, but I mean, I'm sure we consume aluminum and, everything else, to some degree. And so you can have these things that amplify the response. It's like kind of this foreign substance that kind of turbo boosts your immune system. And so you can actually use less antigen.
Yep.
So sometimes, people think that we're like robots and that we never get like upset at work and stuff like that. But like we're human beings, and like I would think that kind of having some of the same conversations over and over again could lead to frustration. There's in my job, I work with cancer patients, but there's a couple subjects that I'm like, ugh. Like I just, and I try to hide that part of me and just have the conversation and just talk about the nuts and bolts. Mm-hmm. But it's just like, the last thing I want to do is to talk about, some of these kind of nuanced things. Like people will say, hey, I've read mistletoe is like good for curing cancer, or like hedge apple, or, there's all these things. Yeah. And I kind of got to, I've developed a 2-minute spiel, but it took a while to like shorten it so it like it kind of accomplished this task. But does it ever get challenging or frustrating dealing with this?
I mean, like I said, our office, we kind of screen people, when they call, I want to be a new patient. And one of the first questions is, do you plan to vaccinate?
Yeah.
We will happily see people for what we call a meet and greet, before your baby comes and you have some questions. Yeah. And I think that's probably a little bit more where I'm talking about vaccines. And it's just, I mean, I guess what's frustrating for me is the parents don't typically have like a specific question to me to address. It's usually like, I'm worried about them, or I just don't want to do them. And if I try and press a little further, I just don't get very far.
So there's kind of no underlying substructure to the thought.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I can talk about generics, about why vaccines are good and why I fully support them and those sorts of things. And sometimes that's enough, and that's great. I mean, honestly, I'd be happy to sit with you for an hour if you were going to change your mind at the end.
Yeah.
But I've also never had that experience. You know, in my early career, I did a lot more of that. And I don't think I changed anybody's mind. I think people were really kind of already set in their ways, and I don't even know if they were listening to what I had to say.
Yeah.
And that alone is very frustrating. And, truthfully, the Academy of Pediatrics has kind of taken the stance that that's really what we should be doing, that we should be bringing these people in repeatedly, and we should continue to talk with them in hopes of changing minds. But I think a lot of us have just, it's frustrating. I have to get through my day, and I have to feel good at the end of the day that, I took care of all my patients the best I possibly can.
Yeah. And you got a waiting room full of people. I mean,
right.
you don't, the truth of the matter is you don't have like a ton of time to spend towards something that's not going to be productive for you or the patient.
Right. And a lot of it just kind of comes down to at the end as being like, look, I've kind of explained this to you. This is our policy. And usually by then they've packed the baby up and they're halfway out the door.
Yeah.
So, and like I said, they'll find that doctor that they trust more and hopefully can have a relationship with and go from there.
Yeah. This is kind of a personal side, and I'll tell you how I kind of looked at the COVID vaccine, which is different than the childhood vaccinations.
Sure.
It was new. It was a newer technology with the mRNA vaccine.
Which I think is really cool technology, though.
It definitely helps you develop a vaccine a lot faster than the old way. Because you just have to come up with a code. I think they did it in like 21 days.
Yeah, it was
then,
amazing.
Run it through the ribosome. So I definitely, was like, I knew that like either through herd immunity of like everybody getting COVID, or vaccination, that was the only way out. And so I was definitely like very happy to like get the vaccine initially and then the booster. But as like there were like many shots that went on, I was not like as excited to continue getting, like I didn't get the 8th, COVID vaccine. But I tried to like really call balls and strikes like the best I could and like go at it as rationally as possible. And the virus was weakening too.
Right.
And so
by the booster time, you mean?
Yeah, or even past the booster.
Yeah.
And so less people were going into the hospital. And so I like looked at the risk of people my age. And so the demographic was like 25 to 50. And so kind of a broad demographic. And it was like, at that point, it was like 27 out of 100,000 were going to the hospital. And the vaccine was 90% effective. And so at keeping you out of the hospital.
Right.
And most of the people going into the hospital had multiple comorbidities. And I'm at the time, I'm early 40s at the time. And I had no medical comorbidities. And, I thought of myself as healthy. I guess you never know. And so I like literally like broke it down. I think you got to break things down to math or physics if you can to make the best decisions. So I was like, okay, so for like a nice round number, we'll say like it took the 27 out of 100,000 and knocked it down to about 10. And then if you get the vaccine, it's 1. And if you don't get it, you're 9 out of 100,000. And then I looked up like the risk of vaccine injury, which was like 1 in 10,000, which is also known as 10 out of 100,000. So it was about the same as keeping you out of the hospital. Now, that's just one component of it.
Sure.
There's a herd immunity component too. There's a patient component too. But like I tried to be as objective as I could, and because I think people can be kind of an ideologue when they're anti-vaccine. And I think that people can be an ideologue when they're pro-vaccine. Now, if you have to choose between the two, it's probably better to be a pro-vaccine ideologue because it's vetted by all these systems.
Sure.
You know, it's not for no reason that they're giving you the thing that they're giving you. And so you're probably going to win out, you know, if you just are an ideologue on that side. But sometimes I do wonder when people are getting like literally their 8th booster. To me, that seems sometimes like a little much. But I mean, if you think I'm an idiot, tell me.
No. I see where you're coming from. I mean, everything's different with kids, and so my standpoint is always, you know, from the kid, and also as someone who's working with kids. I mean, I got my booster because I benefit the risk versus, and you know, honestly, I'm employed by WashU. If I get COVID, they are sitting me at home for a week.
Yeah.
So that alone is worth it for me not to get COVID.
And the data on the vaccines that they use in children has decades of studies.
Childhood ones. Yeah, for sure.
And so, so this is kind of not that. You know,
well, but so the thing with kids is, you know, most of them were doing well. Most of them, you know, were not landing in the hospital. And there was the issue with the boys and the pericarditis and that sort of thing. So I think for me, it was a lot more complicated making the decisions for my kids than it was for myself. And I'll say, actually, so myself and my 2 boys, we were actually part of the study.
Okay.
So, and I know my youngest, maybe both, I don't remember now. I know the youngest definitely got the shot. Like, because they basically, you come in and you get a shot and you don't know if it's placebo.
Was it 1 to 1 or 2 to 1? Do you remember?
I don't remember. Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
A lot of times they'll do 1 to 1.
Right.
You know, half the people get not, you know, a placebo and half the people get the shot. But sometimes they'll do 2 to 1.
Yeah, it might have actually been 2 to 1. I don't remember.
I think it may have.
But and they did it in stages too. So like my older son was part of the study first, and then the younger one. And I just remember, you know, they'd get the shot and they'd come home, and I'd be like, poking their arm. Hey, does that hurt? Does that hurt? You know, move your arm. Does that hurt? Does that hurt? And I remember the youngest being like, wow, that hurt. And I'm like, oh, yes, he got the shot. And just being so excited that, you know, they were able to be vaccinated against this thing that was like running rampant through the country at the time. Yeah. And just being so grateful that there was a vaccine. And I remember, you know, with my oldest trying to get her a vaccine and, okay, how far am I willing to drive to, you know, get this for her? Because remember when they were really scarce and you had to sign up on Walgreens and be like the first one there.
I've forgotten about that. But
I think it was trauma in my brain. But, you know, and I remember going through that, and a lot of us pediatricians were talking and we're like, yes, now the world is seeing what it's like when there's no vaccine. And people are seeing how important vaccines are. We really thought that people would kind of come around then, but it really was kind of the exact opposite. You know, people really started to distrust how important the vaccine was and how, you know, quickly they say it was put together and those sorts of things. And I think what we're seeing now in terms of vaccine hesitancy in some ways goes back to the COVID shot and the rollout of it.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, one thing, you know, I did analyze the data a while back. And I mean, you definitely saw the people who are most at risk got the vaccine, you know, at the highest rate. You know, people over 65 were way more likely to get vaccinated than an 18-year-old. Yeah. And, you know, those were the people that were, you know, more likely than not going to be in the hospital. 18-year-olds did kind of shockingly well. And you know, the young people tended to not get that sick of COVID.
They were doing pretty well.
One thing that was, you know, concerning to me is thinking back to the flu of 1920, where the young people actually, I think, got sick more often than the older people, which is kind of a weird thing. But I mean, things like that are possible too. And so there's a ton of unknowns. Right. And you just got to, you know, I would say in a general sense, I trust these large institutions, but I have some of a little bit of skeptic in me. Sure. I mean, I know people in power tend to abuse power. And so if it's like a big company or things like that, you know, I do sympathize with the skeptics. But I think that if you're kind of in a data-free zone, I mean, you really do got to trust the experts. Fortunately, with childhood vaccinations, it's definitely not a data-free zone. Right. And there's plenty of good data that supports it. And so I think it's okay to be skeptical, but take a good dive, you know, into the data. And that's one of the things that's great about AI too. It's kind of like the Oracle Stone. I mean, you can go ask it any question and you can even cross-check it with multiple AIs and see if you get the right answer.
Well, and I think that's an important message to get across too, is that there is lots of data on these vaccines. And I think it's just really important to point out this has been looked at. This is done science. Like there is such a thing as done science. We don't have to redo everything. We don't have to remake the wheel. This has been studied extensively.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that people get that information. I mean, my biggest fear is that these things are going to be pulled off the market.
I don't have a good sense of what's to come with that. I think it's a highly politically charged, obviously a highly politically charged environment. Something like this, a generic statement like the science is not clear. I think that you can say, hey, we've got a lot of science to back that up.
Right.
One individual is not going to be able to go in and say, I'm going to analyze all the science myself, unless you have like a PhD like you and I have, where you can like analyze the science and see. But I think something like whether it's OpenAI or Grok or Anthropic or even DeepSeek, if that's still legal, but you can use these AIs to help point you in the right direction. And they could have biases, but I doubt like they all have the same bias. And so you run it through there and you see, okay, there's a lot of data that supports this. And we should feel good about moving forward. I honestly do think that there so that can be dangerous. I think that it is important that we actually are focusing on our health, and some of this stuff. And so I think there can be good and bad, as Alexander Solzhenitsyn said. The line between good and evil does not run on a map. It runs between every man's heart. And so we all have some good and bad in us. And so I think it's good to talk about the health of America and stuff like that. We don't, there's doors that we don't need to open again.
But I just think that's the biggest message that, because I think we're going to be hearing a lot of that there is no evidence, and there is actually.
So where would you point people if they're looking for, they're saying, hey, I want to do my own research. Where would you point them to?
CHOP has a really good website, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. There's Vaccinate Your Baby, also a good website. And then one of my favorite vaccines guys is Paul Offit. And he's written several books about a lot of the things that we've talked about too. And I think he has a Substack that has been pretty active recently too, talking about some of these issues.
And so to steel man the other side, okay, so that's the opposite of a straw man. If somebody were to say, yeah, but these are people in the industry, they're going to believe all this through orthodoxy. Do you think it's reasonable to use the AIs to run it through there and say, hey, like, what's the evidence of vaccine, or do you trust that less?
I would want to try it myself first before saying something. But I mean, I feel like they should be coming up with the same stuff.
They do. They're supportive. And so I like I said, again, like I do trust the AIs a lot. I think that, and especially if you get the same answer from multiple AIs.
Right.
So the question I asked was, what's the strongest evidence that you have against vaccination? So I was trying to find, like, what's the strongest anti-vaccine argument for children?
What did it pull up?
Wakefield, which just is not strong.
Right.
And so I actually said, no, that's a straw man argument. I want the strongest argument. And it just couldn't really pull up, much else than that, which is, I actually thought that there would probably be some kind of just, the p-values, p equals 0.05, for significance. So you'd think 1 out of every 20 studies is going to show some errant thing. And like, it couldn't really even show that. And so there wasn't a lot. When I searched for the strongest argument against it, there wasn't a ton of like scientific evidence against it that it could give me.
That.
And so I think you really got to do red team, blue team, and try to find the strongest argument on each side, and then see how they kind of, when you're solving any problem, whether it's running a business or science or whatever, you want to call balls and strikes. You want to be as objective as possible. You want to pretend like you know nothing. And because our experiences help us make a lot of decisions, but they also bias us as well. And so when I ran it through, I just wasn't able to find anything except for Wakefield's stuff, which has been largely debunked. And he may have even admitted to, I can't remember if he did or not, but I think he even admitted that there was some kind of malarkey going on.
Yeah. I mean, he lost his license and all of that.
And so Well, Lisa, I think we beat this with a hammer, but I very much appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate your perspective. And I think this is a timely and important thing to talk about, and it's good to kind of go through, the pros and the cons and the pluses and minuses, and try to dissect this as objectively as we can to give people as much accurate information as possible.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Thanks so much, Lisa.
All right.
Join us next time for Doc Discussions with Dr. Jason Edwards. It's medicine for your body, mind, and spirit.